Okay, everyone, if I could ask you all again to take your seats one more time as we come towards our final session of the day. So we're going to finish the same way that I have started every single one. Can I ask the team again to put back up Menti, please? If I could ask you to put back up Menti. So what we have now is, of course, our conversation all around stakeholder engagement. So I'm just going to ask everybody, first of all, to rank the importance of the underpinning principles of engagement. So what we have here is diversity and inclusivity, transparency, early and ongoing engagement, participative and openness. So what do you think, in what order should they be? But in addition as well, if you don't feel some of them aren't important, that's fair enough, but just rank them as you find them. So far we have five answers. Right, early and ongoing engagement is currently the one that seems to be the one gaining the most traction at the moment. And we have got 10, so I do know that you're putting good consideration into this. Okay, we have 3 very much in the middle now. Sometimes I liken this to watching a horse race. And so far, early and ongoing engagement. So the 3 in the middle are moving around, but not the first one. Early and ongoing engagement seems to be the first one all the time. So early, specifically early and ongoing. Regularly and often, okay. So it looks like I've 63, 64 answers in there now. So, and again, I'll be putting these points to the panel as we go along. So when it comes to that, it looks like early and ongoing engagement is number 1, transparency, participative and diversity and inclusion, they're round about the middle, and then openness is the last one. Okay, but what is not up there? And that is my next question, is what is not up there? What is the other elements of stakeholder engagement that is not up there? What are the other guiding principles that should be up there? All day we've talked about the importance of this. What are the other guiding principles when it comes to that? Okay. And as I'm sure you're aware at this stage, the bigger the word, or the more regular the word, the bigger the font will get. Okay, we have 2 front runners here on the first 20 answers. 3 now, I would say. Sometimes you can get subsets. And of course, Menti doesn't know if somebody says communicate and communication. Okay. Okay, so at this stage, based on where are we at, 60-ish, heading for 70 responses, I would say communication, education, listening, trust. Around the fringes then we have quality data quality, listening, science, and then around, if I keep going further, ecosystem-based management, good faith conversations, honesty, visionary spaces, belief, goals, equity, benefit, reciprocated transformational, common vision, youth inclusion, leadership, understandable, political backing, etc. Okay, but communication and education is in there. Trust and listening, in my opinion, would be a subset of effective communication. So they're 2 key things that we see. Okay, I'm just going to put back on the Q&A slide. As you can see, I have 85 questions. You have been one of the most participative audiences, gratefully, that I've ever worked with, which is wonderful. There are 63 questions that still haven't been answered, so please do increase them. And this one, by the way, has come up. I've seen this come up pretty high. I'm going to ask that question of the stakeholder group that I'm about to bring up. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I am now going to invite 5 people to come to the stage, and each of those people are, can I first of all invite Oonagh Duggan from BirdWatch Ireland. Secondly, I'm going to invite Bernadette Connolly, Coordinator of Cork Environment Forum and Coastwatch Regional Coordinator, Kieran Healy of NIFA, Niall MacAllister, Niall McManus of EarthRoute Limited. If I could ask you all to please join me on stage, and if you would give them a round of applause, please. Okay, so and we've Kieran there as well, perfect. So in this case, as you can tell, what we're going to do now is simply have a panel discussion. There aren't going to be individual presentations, and this is our time that we really can get in an understanding where different stakeholders sit in this. Okay, so Bernie, I'm going to start off with you. As I had mentioned, you're coordinator of Cork Environment Forum and Coastwatch Regional Coordinator. And the title of this conversation is Town Hall, Harnessing Stakeholder Involvement for Better MPA Outcomes. So what are the positives and what concerns do you have when it comes to MPAs?
So the positives, I think they've been very well outlined by all the other speakers today. The positives are about transforming our ocean health so that we have that future for the generations to come, not just for us here in the present. And I think, they've all been outlined really well, and the functioning that it does as well in our dual crisis of climate. And we're very lucky, I think, still to have quite a diverse ecosystem there, and to also have really valuable things like our seagrass beds, our kelp forests, and all of those things. So I think at the moment it's a really good time, but we need to do it fast because it has deteriorated so much. The concerns that I would have in relation to our MPAs is that they would be those paper parks that we've had to date. We haven't had good management plans, that we wouldn't put the resources behind them. I mean, Lochgine was mentioned earlier. That was designated in 1981. It's deteriorating over 40 years, and we didn't learn from that and do more in between. So the time lag that we've allowed to happen. There's fragmentation at a local level, there's fragmentation across government as well. The other area is the political will to do it, and the leadership was mentioned, I think, today quite a bit. We need to see better leadership across the political spectrum as well to really make this happen and to really, I suppose, do it quickly. Okay,
so positives have been outlined. The concerns is that the time lag is too long and the political will needs to be there. Okay, so Niall MacAllister, you are a wildlife skipper and instructor with West Cork Sailing and Marine Conservation Research. What's your take on this theme?
Well, my first take would be, I'm here. This is amazing. Look at this building, it's beautiful. And someone like me has been invited to come and talk and represent marine tourism, ecotourism. We're a small band of people. We generally sort of one-man band, one-woman band. We don't have a huge amount of time. We're trying to run our businesses. And obviously, the designation of MPAs in our region, it's a real no-brainer that it's going to be a good thing for us if it's done correctly. But I think if we're not brought along and we're not encapsulated in what's happening, then for us, we can lose an awful lot. We've invested a huge amount. We don't make a huge amount of money. We just do it because we love what we do. We love the environment that we work in. Obviously, we're all wildlife and nature enthusiasts. So I think for us is being brought along, and I think that's the message that seems to be coming out through this whole conference here, which is great. So
welcome, MPAs are welcome, as long as you're brought along and considered from your point of view as well.
Absolutely, very much welcome. I'm very fortunate in that I have other jobs, I can do other things, I work in research as well, so I'm not totally connected, if you like, or linked by my business. And I think MPAs are great. So even if I wasn't brought along, I would survive. But I have plenty of friends and plenty of colleagues who work in the industry. They don't have the resources that I have. They're not as fortunate in their job. So their livelihoods would be very much at stake if they weren't brought along, if they weren't included.
Okay, so picking up on the theme we've talked about a lot today about local engagement and engaging with people who it really would be affected by. Okay, Oonagh, Duggan, you are Head of Policy and Advocacy, BirdWatch Ireland. Can you take us through your stakeholder point of view, please?
Thanks. So BirdWatch Ireland is a science-based conservation organisation focused on the conservation of wild birds. And so our perspective is that, I suppose, as a science-based organisation, we're churning out a lot of science on wild birds and the impacts to them, and yet we still don't feel like government is listening. And this is the same as on land as well as on sea. So as a stakeholder in this whole process, I suppose my concern is that, we've had many decades now of legislation and failure to enforce it on land. My serious concern is we try to replicate that in the sea, which is a whole new regulatory authority and a whole new
suite of legislation going to come with it, that we will make the same mistakes all over again. And that it disillusions me a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, another thing is, 63% of Ireland's wild bird species are red or amber listed birds of conservation concern, yet every environmental assessment says there'll be no significant adverse impacts to every single development. So, you're kind of trying to join the dots here, looking at declines in front of your eyes, and we're monitoring them, we have the signs, and yet environmental assessment continues to say everything's okay. And I think this comes down to cumulative impacts and the lack of adequate work done in this area. So I'm just really hoping that we have to kind of use the precautionary principle and come from a place where stakeholders are listened to, and that's all stakeholders, including fishers, and those involved directly for their livelihoods on the marine environment, that we're all sitting around the table working this out, and that requires resources to be able to do that, resources for staff members at BirdWatch Ireland and the other NGOs to be able to engage. That would be my perspective.
So again, welcoming but concerned about making mistakes, and the political will, as you mentioned, but also the environmental assessment needs to take into consideration this as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Much more honest kind of outcomes, and acting on the side of the precautionary principle, which is a foundationary principle of the treaties of the European Union.
Okay. Kieran Healy, you are Director of the National Inshore Fishermen Association. What's your stakeholder group's perspective on this?
Mine would be a little bit shorter. Strange as it may sound coming from a fisherman, I think MPAs could be the kind of saviour of the inshore industry, because we can all see the status quo isn't going to do it for us. I'm speaking strictly now from an inshore fishing point of view, not the broader industry. I think people would be, if they're better educated on them, if they're better informed on MPAs, the process, the ongoing process, how they're set up, they would be more accepting of them. At the minute, there's a big fear of them. People are afraid they're going to be put out of work. That's kind of going into one of your later questions there. But I really don't see too many negatives. I see as I said, they could be the saviour of our industry, because we need more fish. We need more measures available to produce those fish for us. I think Dr. Rashid was comforting, for want of a better word there, for inshore fishermen, and I thought Valerie from the World Bank as well. Very, very positive talks. I felt if more fishermen could hear them and listen to them, they would be more at ease with the idea of the MPAs.
So Niall, again, very positive, but it's knowledge and it's informing. It's one of the things that people said they wanted most out of the day, and it's one of the principles that people said that they needed is communication and listening as well. Okay. Yeah. Niall McManus, you are Managing Consultant at EarthRoute Limited. Can you share your thoughts on this title from an offshore wind energy point of view?
Thank you. The important thing I think is it's the management of risk. Offshore renewable energy is a risky business, as in there's the risk of it's an emerging industry going into an often a bit violent and unpredictable ocean. But with that, there are two things that to be managed the risk. There's, in the environment, in the economic terms, the value at risk, the managing the project. But there's also the value at stake, and that is the community. That is what they use now in natural resources. It's achieving social license to operate. That is getting everyone on board to agree that this project is in the common good. And to understand, and this is talking on kind of behalf of really my client is an interloper coming into the ocean commonage. It's not from this country. It's my client, to transparency, is Hexagon AB, a Swedish developer. But in coming into the ocean commonage off the northwest of Ireland, it realizes it has to accept that there are communities that have made their living off the ocean for generations. With that community's income, be it from fisheries and associated industries, is also connected to the environment. So with that, it's important that whatever is done strengthens and adds to resilience of existing industries, while at the same time helping and supporting environment, because they are interconnected. And where you have to take this in a kind of a long-term view, and again, we're talking about risk, is ocean health is incredibly important to the offshore renewable energy business, because as I said, it's high risk, and you're taking forecasts on multi-billion euro investments into a changing climate. Now, this hasn't been a good month for wind, because there's been no wind. Now, if we are going into the North Atlantic, which is changing, are we looking at more intense winters, more storm events? Are we looking for benign summers? Neither are good for wind. So being cognizant of climate is part of your risk profile, and that risk profile includes the environment and the communities that live within that area.
Okay, so if I could summarise that, the wind energy industry is looking to de-risk multi-billion projects, etc. An interloper, as you mentioned, into the ocean commonage needs to be brought along like every stakeholder, and an understanding that this is interlinked within climate change, of course, which we've heard right throughout the day. So, Bernie, can I go to you then on this? Broadly speaking, as I listen to you all, MPAs are either welcome, cautiously welcome, precautionary welcome, but welcome. So what is holding back stakeholder engagement?
I think it's the processes we have in place. We talk about public participation all of the time as a really positive concept, but we are not very good at implementing it. And I think, going back to Oonagh's point, we have lessons to be learned in how we've dealt with planning and how we have consulted with communities through the terrestrial planning. And we certainly have an opportunity to do marine planning in a much different way, in a much more inclusive way, in a much more equitable way. And the issues are around, sometimes their power, they are around money, they are around expert bias, they are around, agendas of, so we need to take all of that into account. But actually the community people are the people who are generally doing this on a voluntary basis, with absolutely maybe not enough of the information, not enough of the literacy around these things. And they're the people who we talk about empowering them, but actually we're not empowering them, because actually people tell us all the time they do feel powerless in what happens and in whose voices are being heard. So often those voices are not the voices that are being heard, where they need to be. And we talked a bit today about designating, like this co-creation process of being involved in the designation process, being involved in the management and all that. But we haven't seen that to date. We see unilateral designations happening that doesn't include the community, that isn't cross-referenced with communities, that isn't talked through. We don't have the dialogue. And yet we have really good examples, and I'd just like to refer to two. In the late 90s, we did a really thorough integrated coastal zone management process in Bantry, and it's called the Bantry Bay Charter. Anyone can look it up. Spent a lot of time, a lot of resources, and I know Harriet, who facilitated the 66 groups that took part in that, is here today. And it was a great process, and we never allocated budgets. So there was like about 2 years that there was a bit of implementation, but we didn't do that. So in one sense, we pull up communities to give them hope and say you're involved and you're part of it, and then you don't resource what happens. So that's one issue. And I suppose the other area where we do things really, really well, and I think we can take lessons for, and one person presenting did reference it, is our Citizens' Assembly. It's a fantastic, transparent, really, really good, unique process that Ireland does really well. It's one of the processes that we do really, really well. We can replicate that kind of process at a local level around MPAs, and that's the type of thing we should be doing, to really bring stakeholders, all the stakeholders on board.
Niall, MacAllister, Bernie there gave two examples of local, Citizens' Assembly, I suppose is more national, but they're both examples of how stakeholder engagement could be advanced and remove some of the things that are holding it back. If we look around the world, though, where can we look for best practice that we can take inspiration from and emulate here in Ireland around that?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate in my job in that I have travelled to quite a lot of places, some exotic places, and I am very lucky in that I've seen firsthand not necessarily MPAs, but certainly protected areas, not MPAs in the sense that we're talking about here, but protected areas. One classic example that I was working in the Caribbean for a few years, and I happened to get involved with the Jacques Cousteau Reserve off Guadeloupe because I speak French and I was acting as a translator there. I ended up, because of my boat skills, putting down moorings for yachts, because one of the things that with the protected area that they created, they had closed off all anchorages to this protected area. So that meant that nobody could actually go in there because nobody could actually anchor. So we thought, okay, well, let's put in some moorings there for the boats so the boats can go in there, they can moor. And then subsequently from that, then very quickly followed on, there were dive boats started appearing. It had been a fairly sort of rural and quite, poor area. By the time I was there, I saw the changes that actually came about. Everybody started getting involved in the boats. There was permitting. It was all very well regulated. And on stream, then it's become one of Guadeloupe's. That it's now been connected to the terrestrial reserve, and it's become a UNESCO heritage site. It's one of Guadeloupe's biggest money drivers that they have on the island. And subsequently, a lot of the other Caribbean islands have now discovered that if they follow suit and do the same thing, Bequia being another example, which is on St. Vincent and Grenadines, is a very, very poor island, incredibly poor. There's a couple of people there decided that they were going to start protecting the hawksbill turtles there. That suddenly snowballed into a protected area, a marine reserve, and then dive boats, loads and loads of boats. Again, permitting, you have to pay a permit if you want to go there, and it's brought in money, not huge amounts of money, but a lot of money for the local communities, and it's managed to contain or keep the local community that's living there. Now they're no longer living hand to mouth. They have a future, their children have a future, there's education programs, there's health programs, all that kind of stuff. And most of that has come about because 4 or 5 people in the early 90s said that we need to protect the hawksbill turtle. So it's there, it's evident. The Azores, again, another place that I've had the opportunity, somebody mentioned today, what's the protection, what have MPAs done for cetaceans? The Azores is a classic example. I mean, up until the 1980s, the Azores was the hotspot for whaling, with decimating whaling, huge whaling populations. An organisation, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, that I happened to do some work for, they managed to go down there in the late 80s and turn the tide on that and get people, actually, rather than actually killing whales, they said, well, hey, why don't we just go out and have a look at these animals? And now, because of the protections that have been come into place for the Azores, all of these whaling families have now turned the tide completely and are now whale watching boats. There's whale watching boats going out. Again, it's regulated, but it's one of the Azorean biggest industries, is the whale watching industry.
So 2 key underlying themes there, starting off with that community, a bit like what we heard both from Valerie and Siobhan earlier, bottom up, and secondly then the regulation to go along with it and manage the parameters accordingly is what I'm hearing you say. Yeah. And what I do want to put to you, Oonagh, is Bernie mentioned it in particular in saying that one of the concerns she has around MPAs is the lag and how long it takes. And it's been coming up all day, is how long it takes to implement this. How do you balance pace and proper sustainable dialogue to make sure that pace is going to result in sustainable outcomes?
Yeah, can I just mention as well, just with the earlier question, I hope there's no misunderstanding, but I'm totally backing marine protected areas, and especially including SPAs, marine SPAs for birds, critically important. So just want to make sure that's known. But I mean, I think there's a need for resources to be put to this from government and maybe other sources as well to actively engage with the range of stakeholders. And I know that there's public consultations and there's meetings that we can attend, but you never feel like you're fully listened to, because I keep going to all these meetings as a stakeholder, and we struggle for resources to get to them, and yet don't see concerns fully integrated into final outcomes. So we really need active listening, resources to be put to stakeholder engagement, because the urgency is there, but I don't think we're going to get to our goals if we don't bring people along. And so there has to be a kind of reckoning, I think, that you will leave people behind if you don't put time and energy to that process. So, you know, the house is on fire. We need to get everybody out, and we need to do it in a way that we're not tripping people up.
Okay. It's a very strong analogy, for sure. And Kieran, when I asked that question, you know, what are the things that are needed in order for this to happen? One of the words that appeared up there quite strongly was trust. And can I ask you, one of the silent detractors of stakeholder engagement is lack of trust. Do you see lack of trust in this stakeholder engagement process? And if so, what's the root of it?
There is lack of trust. I'd say part of the reason is lack of communication between ourselves and the process. We're only a producer organisation, a wet week, so we weren't even legally required to be consulted, really. So that's a huge step forward for us. I feel there should be more like me representing the inshore fishermen at these kind of meetings. There are only 2 inshore POs in the country, but the main thing is to get the message, the positive messages to the industry. You'll probably laugh now, too many people would get anything positive from Donald Trump's presidency, but what he did prove is that the more you repeat something and keep repeating it, the more people will believe it. So if you can keep repeating the positives from the MPAs and allaying the fears of inshore fishermen, the more will buy into the process.
Woo. I don't think I've ever heard as many US presidents quoted in one conference all day, both sides of the track, and vice as well. Let's not forget. Now, I also want to, taking your point very much, Kieran, and going to you, Niall McManus, is there's a range of questions coming in here at me that, and I don't need to repeat them or tell how many upvotes there are, you can all see them. There is a sense that the objectives of wind farms and the objectives of MPAs are in conflict. Can you address that plainly, please?
Actually, I don't think so. Because one of the things we also got to remember, the legislative landscape that the offshore wind industry, or offshore renewable energy industry is entering into, it's as a plan-led approach. Therefore, the government is determining what they call DMPs, DMAPs, designated marine area plans. In other words, sections within the EEZ that they determine suitable for offshore renewable energy. Now, where they position those is the determination of the government and its internal processes. And where those are positioned relative to the MPAs is again within their own process. So I think, and I have been able to talk to 1 or 2 other members of offshore renewable energy, and the only view that was coming across was, well, if MPAs are to be created and there's no debate that they should be debated, that against them being created, the only view is that they should be done to the best scientific vigor. And that maybe draws back to something which Oonagh had said earlier, and it's about resourcing, and it's about resourcing National Parks and Wildlife Service and the others, and the policing and everything to go in to make sure that we have, I think, true MPAs and not paper parks. And with that, so those MPAs are created, and albeit good, and where the DMAPs are positioned, then the offshore renewable energy industry will just go and they will go through the process of that's set out in legislation to begin the permitting. So there is no conflict, but then at the same time, we have to start to think about a conflict. Is the government giving its direction on the ambitions for offshore renewable energy? There have been statements put out for 70 gigawatts ambition. That's an awful lot of sea space. If you have to consider the MPAs, and you also have to consider the fishers. I mean, a colleague of mine went and did a quick calculation. At the moment, the ambition for Europe is 160 gigawatts. Now, using the ballpark figures for the amount of the size of a wind farm, That's a wind farm kind of 20 kilometres across that would stretch from Kerry to Newfoundland. So that gives you a vision of the amount of space. So again, there is, I think, I'm slightly also talking here for my client, we're only one company looking for a small piece of ocean, but with European and government objectives for offshore renewable energy and for marine spatial, for MPAs and for fishers, then there is a conflict of space, which is not for us to solve, but I think is very much a government and with that, of course, stakeholder inclusion.
Okay, so it's not necessarily conflict between those two ideas, but actually how do you align those from a governmental point of view, both strategy-wise and operationally? I do now want to turn to the audience. I have lots and lots of questions coming in here. Bernie, I'd like to put the one that's top of the list here to you. And I'm going to paraphrase it, if I can. 18 upvotes, and that is, if all stakeholders should be at the table, have they all been asked to speak today? So obviously we have 5 different stakeholders here. We've heard from various people earlier on. I'm going to paraphrase this question, and I'm going to ask, what stakeholder gets overlooked in this conversation?
So obviously, nature itself and the marine environment, so our lovely by-the-wind sailors, our beautiful humpback whales that we've been seeing off the coast here very recently, we're the voices for that. So that's something to really remember, that voice is never here, and it's only a representative voice that we can give for that. So Oonagh with the birds, other people with different voices for that. So that's what we should always remember, and I think it was referenced earlier, and I don't know how we really adequately bring that into the conversation. The other people that are missing, we're a tiny island, Ireland is small, and for people who don't know Ireland, Athlone is the centre of our country. But we talk about coastal communities, so 40% of us do live within 5 kilometres of the coast, and that's because of our cities and the density of population in our cities that are all port cities. But we have a cohort of people who are in the Midlands, as we call it. It's their commons too, and they're left out of the conversation completely. And it is their commons. This is commons, as was said earlier. Agriculture is different, farmers own the land. Here, it's our commons, and they are entitled to be at the table too, I think. I think Emer spoke about the young people. I think that's definitely something we don't see enough representation of at most things. And I think there's a lot of other people, everyone here, pretty much, that I know a lot of, we're, advocates for this. So we have a big job of work to do to kind of bring many, many more people in. But one thing I don't like that has been kind of agreed is the community benefit then that will filter to communities, and it's both for our interconnector and also for other projects, is that it will be the benefits will accrue to those coastal communities most affected. And while there should be proportionality, I think everyone in the country should have some, if we're going to allow our commons to be developed for offshore renewable energy, where there are huge profits to be made, and we want to be the biggest exporter, in Europe of it, then that should accrue for everyone. So I think they're not at the table, and they're also not accounted for in that process.
So people who don't live in coastal communities, but specifically there are people who live 5 kilometres from the coast and young people, as Emer had referred to, but also that understanding of how benefits will flow to all communities. Now, I've changed Menti, by the way, and I've now just, because we've had an awful lot of questions all day, I've now changed it to where I'm now looking at the most recent questions. I just want to be fully transparent with you all about that. There's a question that kind of keeps coming up here, and I'm just going to put it straight to you, Niall MacAllister, and again, I'll just set the context for it, but 3 upvotes so far. It was sent in 11 minutes ago. Could the panel give an example of stakeholder engagement that has taken place in relation to establishing MPAs? So I'm going to ask you that first, and I'm going to ask you about the timing of decision-making within that.
Okay. This is really sort of, from my perspective, this is the first time that there has been any engagement with my industry, the marine tourism that I know of. And if we're looking at legislation being put in place within the next, or certainly before the end of the summer, that sort of seems to be the way it's kind of going. We're all very much in favour of MPAs. From my industry, it could really only be a good thing, can't it? But unless there's going to be strict enforcements as to where I can go, what I can do. As I say, I'm not too badly affected, but I know people within the industry who are terribly badly affected. So I think, you know, the timeline has kind of gone, you know, in some sense, in that, you know, nobody has really been asked, you know, how is this going to affect me? I don't know how is this going to affect me. I know from previous experiences, and certainly, and I've seen MPAs, and I've worked in MPAs around the world, and I've seen some that have been absolutely amazing and fantastic, but I've also seen some that have been absolutely horrendous. I mean, in Greece, you know, when I worked in Greece, I was teaching sailing, but one of the things that we wanted to do was we used to go to an area that was prolific in sperm whales, because sperm whales were able to come right up close to the coast. The Greek government decided they were going to shut it down. Nobody was allowed to go there. Nobody, we weren't even told, nothing at all. I mean, there was just a huge amount of people were suddenly, they had spent money on boats. I didn't, but I was working for somebody else, but like just suddenly shut down. And then suddenly we find that 20 years later now it's open for seismic, you know, so those kind of things. So I guess, you know, this is the first time that really you know, on my industries that I know of has been asked, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it's going to affect me. You know.
Okay.
That's crazy.
And I know you want to come in here, Oonagh. So if we can take the flip side of this, right? Because there's a range of questions coming in here asking me things like sorry, someone has just sent in here, make maps great again, okay? Right, that's good to know here. So there's things coming in here like how and who should fund the stakeholder engagement process? Is the government expected to do it all? There's a lack of data sharing between stakeholders. How do the panellists feel we could beat share data and information to the best version of MPAs? We haven't time to get into every individual element of that, Oonagh, but what I do want to ask is, let's say we meet again here in a year's time. Progress has happened and their success has been achieved by whatever metric you want to bring up. How would we know that would have happened?
Well, we'd probably be falling on the floor with exhaustion after all the engagement, because that would be serious, rapid engagement over 1 year. But I think success would be where we're all around the table still talking, mostly content, maybe not 100% content, but mostly content with what we're seeing. Trust has been built in terms of the process and resources being put to the legislation, to the management and monitoring, that we're feeling much more confident in the process, and trust and relationships are there, that we feel like this will continue into the future. That's what success looks like to me anyway.
And what key steps need to happen in order to get to that point? When you say about falling over with exhaustion with all of the engagement that need to happen, the individual steps that would need to happen to get there?
Yeah, well, so in my mind, what I'm seeing kind of is, like, firstly, there's a range of stakeholders. You'd need to map out all the stakeholders and who needs to be involved. And I actually liked the word shareholders as part of this. It's a good word that Rashid used earlier. And then I think working with the networks that are involved in each of those areas. So there might be fishers, the NGOs, local communities in the Midlands, a road show. But that requires a lot of funding and a lot of resources to really work. And we haven't had many good examples of that happening. And in another area, I work on the CAP strategic plan, the Common Agricultural Policy, and we still haven't seen, after all 5 decades of the CAP, that work, you know, where people are actually really engaged in developing a food strategy for Ireland, so an agriculture strategy. So this would be breaking new ground, but I think with the right resources, the right mapping, the right communications tool, and getting people in the comms sector involved to help, I think we can do this.
A range of people are agreeing with you, Oonagh, that it's that stakeholder mapping and bringing people to the table is very important. That's what I'm looking at here in front of me. But can I turn that another side there, Kieran? If there is the ambition to progress, and you mentioned there, for example, if the fishing community could hear the positive messages and so on like that, what do you think could hold back progression? Is it not reaching out far enough, not reaching out deep enough? What would hold back stakeholder engagement?
Well, for my part, I'd be conveying the good news as much as I can anyway, the positives of it. in the background, you have people saying, they're only telling you one thing, they'll do another. They're already established, you're only ticking boxes. It's the people in the background. I mean, when you look into them, like, who are they? Ex-fishermen, non-fishermen? Again, now I'm only speaking from my own point of view. So if we can shut those out and shut out their comments out of our ears, we will get an awful lot further. And again, to repeat what I said a moment ago, to keep repeating the good news. I'm sorry there aren't more from my own association here, but they reckoned, hopefully, rightfully, that I was good enough to do it
They
on my
picked
own.
a good man, Kieran. Don't worry, they picked a good man, that's for sure.
But maybe on another day there might be 2 or 3 of us here, you know, that they won't be just depending on myself and the other Inshore organisation as well. It's a pity that they're not here either to hear what's going on, you know.
Okay, and Niall, I'll go to you for this before I ask you all for your sum up. But Niall, as I'm looking here at again what's coming in, like for the most recent comment that has come in here, that is, we should see offshore renewables as a means to decarbonise the ocean and stop global warming. I mean, there is this constant A, B going back forwards and backwards on this, and I mean, vision, communication, empathy for everyone's position is key in stakeholder management. So what can accelerate that, particularly from your own point of view?
Well, I think it's a difficult way to say, to accelerate in same time a sensitive time when, if we're talking about using correct science and data, you know, we can't just get that overnight. And again, it's coming from the company that I work for. There's been a lot of disappointment from the communities, coast communities, about offshore wind, in what they're saying is putting lines on maps, putting a box out there saying, we're going to go there without consultation or anything. And that was maybe the first thing that Hexagon, you know, through our advice, was not to do. And so Hexagon has been in Ireland for over 2 years, yet no one knows where they intend to actually put their wind farm, because a process of engagement has to begin. And that process is actually beginning this week, in that it's fortuitous at the conference this time, and it's not managed, it's just pure dumb luck, is through ICRAG, which is the Irish Centre for Research and Applied Geology, Geoscience, basically coming out of UCC, there's going to be a multi-criteria analysis done on looking in the northwest of Ireland for offshore wind. And what that will be involves is, and it's classic kind of Brundtland model of sustainable development. We have the industry, which is basically my client, Hexagon. You have the fishers, which is economy, and then you have environment, which is the eNGOs. And what has been done is the fishing groups have agreed to provide their data and expertise to this body. Hexagon will be providing its information, its kind of technical requirements, and as we've been talking with Oonagh, and there's challenges with affecting the eNGOs, we're also approaching and have approached previously, now be formal approaches to a number of the eNGOs for them to provide their data and their expertise interpreting this data. So as you come together, there's consensus, want better been agreed by data being provided, the experts weighting their data, and then using the skills, and we won't go into the complexity of that, within UCC is, in essence, running numbers and identifying within the ocean areas that are benign, that no one has a problem with, areas that people don't want, you know, it's a red flag, can't go there, and then other areas where we can find, you know, opportunity, be it ecosystem services or water in the long run. So that is the ambition, and that will ideally bring out a box on the map which Hexagon will then promote. Now, that sounds very good, but I mean, there's the challenges within, and you know, Oonagh would be the first to say it, and I know with the other NGOs, even though Hexagon is willing to pay for the time of NGOs because, you know, they don't do anything for free. They have costs. But the eNGO sector in Ireland is underfunded compared to anywhere else. And Hexacon may be willing to pay for someone's time, but if there's no one to give the time within the eNGO, what that can be done. And I think if we're looking at MPAs and we're looking at real stakeholder engagement and we're looking as into civil society, just the Joe on the street, but also to the eNGO sector, who does have their representative, they have their catchment. They need to be funded, and I think that needs investment.
I'm conscious of time, so what I'm taking out of that is two things. There's a role for data in the conversation as well, data science and the engagement with it, as well as funding for the NGOs to be part of that. I'm now going to ask each of you for your final and closing comments on this, and if I could ask you all from the point of view of what specifically does your stakeholder group want from this process? So, Oonagh, I'm going to start with you and I'll go chronologically up through the panel.
So what we would like is safe spaces for seabirds so that they can breed, forage, do what they do on land and seas, and that we would have a strong EU nature restoration law that would make sure that there is funding put to restoring marine habitats and habitats on land out into the future, and that's funded. And this is a really important aspect of trying to make sure that we can accommodate new activities in the marine space, building on top of everything that's already there. So more offshore wind has to happen. Climate change is impacting species. We need to be meeting our climate goals, there's no doubt. But they can cause risks. We have to restore nature at the same time as we deploy more renewables. Okay,
and very well said indeed from that point of view. Bernie, what is your stakeholder group?
I suppose for us it's really about the communities and the people that we work with through both Cork Environment Forum and Coastwatch being equitable and meaningful partners in the processes. And I guess what we really want to see is those healthy oceans that we really need. And I think one of the things that's frustrating is it's kind of a race, like do we get the offshore renewable energy first or do we get the MPAs first? And the offshore renewable energies always say that they want certainty. So we would love to see accelerated designation and management structures put in place for the MPAs ASAP, right away. And I agree with Oonagh, we have the nature restoration law. And what was said earlier is that we can renew our politicians. So next year we have also a great opportunity for all of us to actually, vote for the MEPs that we want, and we vote for our local, our local councillors that we want. And we want those people to come out and say and take a lead in terms of what we want for MPs, but in terms of biodiversity in general, really, as well.
Okay, Niall?
I think certainly from myself, my own personal opinion, and I think I speak for a lot of the people that I know within my industry, marine ecotourism, is to be brought along, I think, is to be engaged. Fundamentally for us is that we're a very small group. We don't have lobbyists. We don't have, and we don't like to hear about things, after they've happened. I think we've got an awful lot to contribute. Certainly, a lot of the people that I work with, they're very knowledgeable. They're people on the ground. They see what's going on. They all know their seabirds. They know their whales and dolphins. They know their seals. They know their seaweeds. They know what goes on. They have a wealth of information. They're out there. They're either under the water or on top of the water. They have a lot to give, and I think we should be considering that anecdotal evidence as well as empirical evidence when we put together the strategies that we put together.
Okay, Niall?
Right. I think, especially on MPAs, what isn't measured can't be managed, and I think that is data. We need more data to make the correct scientific decisions now and going forward. I think it's totally important, and I said, we do not need paper parks. We need really active, productive, resilient MPAs, and I think, and that is by investment in science.
Okay, and final word to you, Kieran.
What I took from it and I'm sure the association will as well, is clarification of our role in the process, or in fact clarification that we have a role in MPAs in the future, that with proper communication with all the other stakeholders. I've learned a lot here today, I'll be honest. I've been at one or two other MPA meetings today. This is the one from which I've learned most. I also feel we have a role. We can actually educate people on various aspects. There was a bit of traction given to bottom trawling today. There's also pair trawling, which people need a little education on. I won't drag it out now, but I just want to say there's a huge difference between the pair trawling that's taking the fish meal out of the bays in the southwest of the country by big high-powered vessels and the human consumption market for anchovies and sprats and pilchards that's prosecuted by 40-foot boats. There's a huge difference. The mesh size, they're fishing for human consumption market, they're restricted in their horsepower, the size of their gear, the amount of fish they can carry as well. But the term pair trawling has become a dirty word, and I feel that's just one point in where we can maybe educate the other stakeholders as well as the general public.
Well, I want to thank you all for a start, for being here and being honest with us and communicating your points very well, but also for the interaction between everyone and also for your engagement with the questions. So can I ask you all to put your hands together for Oonagh, for Bernadette, for Niall, And so instead of me summarising what that panel has just said, instead we're now going to ask a friend of Fair Seas Ireland instead to, yeah, if you want to we're continuing. See, they're getting on so well now, we have to move them off. So we're going to ask a friend of Fair Seas Ireland now instead to share a reflection and also a set of action steps from what next. So now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Micheál Ó Cinnéide, former Director of the Marine Institute and Environmental Protection Agency. Micheál, the floor is now yours.
The two things I'm going to try and do just very briefly is, I'm conscious that I'm the 20th speaker, so I won't detain you too long, but just to give a sense, some reflections on the sessions we had today, and then, as Susan said, some actions. Where should we go? We meaning the NGO group that organised this, Fair Seas, and all their backers, as well as that government agencies, and as well as that then the people we've heard, the community voices. We all have a role to play in trying to bring MPAs forward. But the first thing I've said there, just in terms of, the mood, I call it holding our breath in Cork. And what I mean by that is that there's a sense of, on the one hand, this is music to our ears. That was a comment that was made to me, I think, by Sally Barnes. And it's a lovely phrase. In other words, there's a lot of support for what's going on, for the ideas that we've heard today. At the same time, there's a couple of questions, really big questions, and you heard them swirling around. There's a good few people who are not here in the room, and there's a good few voices, even though we had 20 really expert speakers. So there's a lot of perspectives we didn't hear. So we actually don't know what MPAs will look like in Ireland. And we certainly don't know what the public participation part of the MPA process will look like. But we did hear a kind of a cautionary note from Malcolm Noonan saying that it's the biggest challenge for Tim O'Higgins and for the colleagues in the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government who are drafting the bill is how to actually really be true to the principles of public participation. And that, for any of us that are working in government, I've been working for 3 decades plus in various state agencies, we are not as good as we need to be at public participation. So the Minister of State flagged that. So they're the questions. So that's why I'm saying a certain amount of what I call bated breath. You might move on the slides if you don't mind. Thanks very much. So 4 actions, and then we'll throw in a few more, that I thought really were flagged a good few times during the day today. And I'll just do them in alphabetical order. Act now. A great sense of urgency from Al Gore, from Brian, from Karen, from Grace, Karen Kozelski at the beginning on behalf of the IEN. We've heard that from many people today, this idea of the importance of acting. Or, as Grace O'Sullivan put it last night at the session in the hotel, stop dithering. I don't know if Grace is still here, but it was really good, her presentation. Because that idea of, we have been talking about this for some time, and Donald Griffin set out the timescale. So that's the first really important set of actions, just get on with it. The second one, as I mentioned, this idea of empowering local communities. And the last session that you just heard there was about that challenge, that question. But there's no doubt about it. Empowering local community means being formally part of the process. And again, if you listen to the words of the Minister, he said, we're trying to figure out how to have the communities involved at all stages. That's a really difficult thing, because sometimes what happens is there's consultation at the beginning, and then afterwards the implementation does or does not take off. For that empowerment to happen, I think it links with the next action, which is figuring out the costs. And in particular, I thought that Valerie did a fantastic job. Well done, Valerie, on that, in terms of there are costs. There are real costs in terms of the management of the MPAs, the protection, the administration, but also stakeholder outreach is very expensive and time-consuming, but crucially important. So to figure out those costs, and I think there's actually a role for the Fair Seas Group, the Coalition and Blue Value and the various people that are supporting this campaign to think about investing in that in the next phase of this campaign. Because the first phase is just the legislation. That's only the start. It's a long road. So how to invest in local communities to increase that capacity, that's a big challenge. And then the focus, as I call it, on the how. Again, it was a phrase that was used by several people. So the sense is that we're pretty clear about the why. Nearly everybody said there's strong reasons why we need to focus on MPAs. Not as much, perhaps, to focus today. And there was a lot of names that I thought would be mentioned. The role of the Marine Institute in gathering the data, the role of BIM in working with the fishermen, the role of the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. Not a word about those three largest marine agencies in Ireland. They need to be in the action plan, a detailed action plan, as Donald has said, a timeline and an action plan for this to work, as well as the Naval Service, which were mentioned, and I see Mark Mellett was here, and it was great to see that. The Naval Service, with their new inshore boats, and lots of other agencies, have to be part of the timeline of the action plan, in the same way we've seen other action plans for jobs and so on in the past. So there's some of the actions. You want to move it on a little bit more? Our good friends. Yes, so some more actions. Again, these are just my own personal perceptions, listening to what was being said here today. What are the key things? There's about 20 or 30 action verbs. And by the way, there was a beautiful, pictorial done on the side here. And again, some of these action steps are mentioned in that. It's well worth a summary looking at that for the day as well. Learning from communities, learning from other MPA experiences, from Mark Costello, from Joe, from Tristan de Coonan, from all these places around the world. But the closer, the better. I was very impressed with some of the stories we heard from the Isle of Arran and so on. So learning from the others, learning from the mistakes of the past. As Bernie Connolly has said, we have had legislation in place for the Habitats Directive for 30 plus years in Ireland, in theory administered by National Parks and Wildlife. But as we've heard from various people, Donald and Bernie and others, the actual objectives, the conservation plans, in many cases are not in place. And so, the word paper parks was used. So we had to learn from that experience and not do that again. But most importantly, learning from local communities. Why do we want an MPA here, and what is it going to achieve? Then that goes on to this business of the legislation, setting out the principles. And in fairness, the Minister did say, and others said as well, the principles of public participation. We have not got that really enshrined in any form of legislation, apart from reference to Aarhus. But the Water Framework Directive, for example, there are many other directives in Ireland that are in the environmental public goods sphere. They're really short on detail in terms of the actual principles and the practices. And again, as Valerie Hickey said, the process is as important as the outcome. So the process of how we do, how we designate, how we manage, how we promote, how we protect the MPAs, all that requires public participation. And if that process isn't working, the MPAs are just on paper. And the last two actions, measure. Again, Valerie and others talked about this idea of gathering the data. We heard it from our colleague from the wind energy sector. There is a role for seriously good scientists. There is an MPA section already within the Marine Institute, and I think that more people from there should be at these meetings. But anyway, they have an important role. We have to invest in the metrics, both in terms of fisheries data, but also socioeconomic data. And then finally, protect the areas. I loved Rashid's comment about the condom. You know, a condom with a hole in it is not great protection. And so we have seen a lot of those in our MPAs and in our SAC travels in the last 30 years in Ireland. So thank you, Rashid, for that memorable comment, you know, as well as for the rest of your wisdom. So the last action verb that I'll just mention is the word swarm. And those of you that were there last night, you heard from Grace again O'Sullivan talking about the importance of working together and love bombing and having cups of coffee with TDs and senators and so on like that, and working. And we've heard that from various people here today. So swarm. So the closing slide, please. Just to finish up, Laud or Sale. My father's people come from the Blasket Islands. And the Blasket Islands potentially is a centre of a really important future marine protected area, which will be wonderful because of the whales and the dolphins and the marine life, and Simon Barrow, and lots of people have done great work down there. But it's also famous for its writers. And one of the writers, a man called Sean O'Crihan, the son of Tomás O'Crihan, he wrote this beautiful, simple book, a fisherman, called Laud or Sale. And I mention it because it's sort of an antidote to this business of urgency and, you know, Al Gore, and we've got to do it now. You know, there's also a side of me that says, let's enjoy the day, let's take stock of the day, take stock of the people that are here and going on board the various ships this evening and so on and so forth, and gather our energies for the future, because this is a long road. But I was really impressed with what I call the balance of realism on the one hand and hope on the other. From Donald Griffin, from most of the speakers here today, there was a sense that yes, we have an opportunity now, but also it's been a long road. So thank you all, and I wish you the best of luck. Go Mahago.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Micheál. And can I just ask the team to bring us back up to Mentimeter? I'm actually not going to ask you to interact with it anymore, but I wanted to bring this up because we had 167 answers to this question this morning, which is, what is it that you wanted out of today? Network, knowledge, information, action, new knowledge, clear call to action, progress, leadership, understand MPA plans, social science, role of the NGO, policy change, marine protections, job opportunities, meet people in person, conservation, knowledge of MPAs, motivation and passion. And I certainly think that all of that happened in abundance, as well, of course, as the networking throughout the day. So, of course, that is going to continue later on. I'm going to ask Aoife to tell us a little bit about that in a moment. But before I do that, yep, you can turn that off, thank you very much. I do just want to highlight a couple of things. Number one is Robin over here, so my right, your left, is almost at the end of showcasing a visual legacy of today. And I'd encourage you all to go over and take a look. Me personally, because of course I can't talk half enough, I am going to be doing a summary video and putting it up on LinkedIn later on of actually talking through it, talking through that narrative, so that'll be there later on today. But we really would encourage you all to go over and to take a look and just look at all of what has been discussed today. In addition, there is a rallying cry for sure to engage with Fair Seas Ireland, whether that is signing up for their newsletter, engaging on Twitter. By the way, Fair Seas, the hashtag Fair Seas was number 3 in Ireland today, trending at number 3, second only to World Ocean Day. And so I think you deserved a round of applause. You took it anyway, so very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. And also to continue engaging and following Fair Seas Ireland, and also on Instagram, etc., because the team there will be very much watching closely what happens as things goes along. But the second thing is, the team have asked me to put a challenge to you, and that is to contact your TDs and to point, and local elected representatives and all elements of the political system, to point out that indeed there is an awful lot of care around the ocean, and for that also to be a key call to action and takeaway from today. Micheál has done a super job of summarising, so I just wanted to add, if I could, 2 points of my own to today. Number one is, I emceed a conference 2 weeks ago about social enterprise, and it is just another angle of where that interface between, as we've heard today, maybe commercial interests and not just the environment, but other elements of ESG interface. And there was a report released on it for the first time ever. Data on social enterprise was released last week. 0.63% of Ireland's GDP is generated by social enterprise, and that represents 3.7% of the total Irish workforce. But in Europe, they're aiming to get to it being 10% of GDP. It's 12% already in France. My point is there's a really big momentum and energy behind social enterprise in particular. So perhaps if that dovetails into the conversations that you're in, is also interfacing with that. I'm not going to call them a stakeholder, but that momentum that's happening in the country at a European and supranational level as well. The second thing I want to mention kind of dovetails in with Emer's area. A lot of people aren't aware that there's a really big funding mechanism, not of money, but of people, called the European Solidarity Corps. This is also EU funded, and what this is this is an opportunity for young people, again, it's that under 30-year-old age bracket, to go on an internship paid by the European Commission to a business or an organisation that is related of something to do with European social and environmental interests. So if you are looking for people to come into your organisation on a funded basis, the European Solidarity Corps could absolutely be a good opportunity for you. It's open to everybody now. Before a couple of years ago, they didn't have it open to businesses, they now do, but it has to be based on something environmental and social. So if you're looking for people to get in and to get behind your organisations from a labour activation point of view, the European Solidarity Corps is funded at a European level. And so I have one last job to do before I invite Aoife up to the stage, and that is to bring today to a close, and this is how I'm going to do it, bang on time. On Fair Seas Ireland, we set our sail, honouring World Ocean Day, a timeless tale. Marine protected areas, sanctuaries for the deep, where creatures of wonder peacefully sleep. Global insights illuminate our understanding of marine life's beauty, endlessly expanding. Fishing, a livelihood and tradition we hold, balancing sustainability, so stories unfold. From Cork's shores, a gem by the sea, a hub of conservation and maritime glee. Delivering transformational change we strive, preserving oceans, ensuring that they survive. Stakeholder engagement, voices in the tide, together we work side by side. To Aoife, Jack and Donal, we extend our grace for your dedication in this noble chase. In the depths of the ocean, mysteries untold, marine wonders to explore and stories unfold. Protecting habitats where ecosystems thrive, marine protected areas, keeping them alive. Global insights guide our quest to safeguard marine life, we're truly blessed. With sustainable fishing, we tread with care, preserving stocks and ensuring they're fair. Cork, a coastal gem filled with pride, where ocean conservation takes a stride. Engaging stakeholders, igniting the flame, for a future where oceans flourish, free from blame. Thanking Aoife for her passion and drive, Jack's dedication helping marine life thrive, and to Donal, a pillar of support, together we make a lasting resort. In the vast world ocean, let us unite, for on this journey we see the light. Fair Seas Ireland, a beacon so bright, on World Ocean Day, we stand for what's right. Over to you, Aoife.
Now, I have no idea how to follow that. Can I just say a big, huge thank you to our wonderful MC, Susan, who has just blown us away in her preparation, her dedication and her enthusiasm. So I think a really big round of applause for Susan. So the aim of this conference was to facilitate conversations between all stakeholders and to build a network of MPA champions across Ireland. I think there were many conversations had today, and it was a very difficult ask for Margaret and Jenny to bring people back from those conversations back to the room to get us back on time today. So I think we achieved our aim with that, and we hope you're going to continue those conversations in the next few weeks and months ahead. I hope each and every one of you have met new people today and have been inspired by our speakers. I would like to thank our speakers for donating their time and their expertise and joining us here in person today. It is greatly appreciated by the team and by the Irish people and by everyone in Cork. As you can tell, I'm from Cork. Thank you also to our Minister Noonan for joining us here today. And thank you to all of you, the audience, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here in person. It makes a huge difference for people to be here, sitting next to each other, having those conversations, and that's what we need to do going forward. Thank you to our online audience for joining us virtually. We appreciate your support and we're delighted we could facilitate your questions online as well. Conserving our ocean requires a team effort, and this was evident throughout today. I would like to thank all those who've worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure everything ran so smoothly. Thank you to my amazing teammates, Donal and Jack, somewhere up there, the wonderful Alana, and all our coalition partners and steering committee members for supporting us and ensuring today went as well as it could. Thank you to our funders for supporting this campaign and enabling us all to gather here today. I would now like to invite you all to join us for a reception on board the L.E. Samuel Beckett and the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group research vessel, the Celtic Mist. We are delighted to have these vessels here with us today to highlight again the team effort required both on land and at sea to ensure we can deliver effective marine protected areas. These vessels are parked at Middle South Jetties is the official title, otherwise known as Kennedy Quay. If you go out the front door and take a right, you can't miss them. So make sure you go out the right door. And if you find the ship, you will be welcomed on arrival with the traditional 99 ice cream on a lovely warm sunny evening, and you'll also have some drinks and nibbles on board the ship. So we really look forward to continuing all the conversations on board the L.E. Samuel Beckett this evening, and we're very, very grateful to have this support here today. Please note we do have another boat trip tomorrow morning, but it is full out, max capacity. If you do not have a ticket, I'm afraid we can't bring you on board. Health and safety must be our priority. So check on the way out if you are booked in, just to double check. Before we leave today, I would like to play us out with the music of the inspirational Claire Sands and Susan O'Neill. This song, shown on the RTE documentary A Note for Nature, showcases the dramatic landscape around our coast and our spectacular marine wildlife. This song is called Carry My Song. Let us leave today and carry this message and our new connections and continue to be the change we want to see in this world.